Can you briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm very, very excited to talk about the world of short dramas and this explosive new industry, especially from a US perspective, since it is still so new here. My name is Chris Wiki. I founded and I'm the CEO of Ember Entertainment. So we both produce films for other platforms and we'll be launching our own platform here pretty soon too, and around July this summer. I've been in the media industry for about 25 years, studied film in school, and then went on to television, where I worked for a very, very small production company early on. This would have been in the late 90s. It was a very small production company, so I was able to do everything: shoot, produce, edit, write. I got to be one of the early avid editors on the West Coast in Utah, where I lived at the time. And then after a few years, I moved to LA and actually got involved in the world of unscripted TV for many years. That's just about when that was blowing up. And that's where I stayed for a very long time, almost 20 years. About 2 years ago, this would have been the summer of 2023, I answered a post on Upwork actually it was an oddly two-sentence word post looking for American filmmakers, and happened to be Flex TV. They sent me the link to their app, and I started watching some of the content on there, and I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Yeah, let's talk. So they sent me a test scene to shoot. So I directed and shot that. And then that was good enough for them. So they sent me the script for a film called Mr. Williams, Madame is Dying. This was going to be their very first American film. And they gave us a very small budget. We had not met face to face. We had primarily been talking through Facebook Messenger. So they were taking a big risk, but they took it with us. We made the film, and that film did really, really well for them. I believe it's still the most watched film on their platform, made upwards of $10 million for them, is what they've told me. And it ended up going on to win the Best Overseas Drama last year at the International Short Drama Festival here in Irvine, California. And that led us to doing more work with Flex, and we've also worked with Dreamy Short and Salty TV, which is a relatively new one that was launched by Snail. They have an office here in Los Angeles. That's where I met them. And then when they went to launch Salty TV, they hired a lot of American producers and people to oversee it. So it's a really interesting hybrid.
Madam is dying. I find that there are some elements like slapping, choking. To me, that's toxic relationships, which
Yep.
were very common in early Chinese short dramas. But nowadays they're less common. What do you think of these storylines?
Well, I'll be quite honest. When we first read it, we were a bit shocked, but we talked it over with, especially our actress, Jean. We wanted to make sure that she was really comfortable with it. Um, I had actually started directing the film the first few days, but because we had such a small crew, I decided that I really wanted this to be a good film, and I was just spread too thin. So I decided to go out and find a director to take over. I purposely went and found a female director so that Jean and Jared would be comfortable with the material. But we really did have to have a conversation about it. And when I first saw it, I was not familiar with any sort of genre like that. And I just figured it was something that was popular in China, so they were testing it here. But come to find out that it is actually a fairly popular genre over here as well. I don't know about now because we haven't really been working in that genre, but it was called abuse romance, is
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I
a
heard
bit
it called.
romance, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was definitely challenging, and a lot of us talked about on the next one maybe finding something that wasn't in that same genre, didn't deal with that same subject matter. So we haven't actually had any scripts come our way since then that are like that. But I would say, yeah, when we first got into it, we were a little shocked.
You and your actors was trying to understand this as well, right?
Yeah. And again, I figured it was just a Chinese story, and that this would resonate in China. more so. But like I said, I come to find out that it is a fairly popular genre here in the US, and it was eye-opening, a bit educational for us.
Have you talked to the audience who watched the Madame is Dying, why they like this story or why they are attractive to the story?
It was really surprising that it did so well. I followed a lot of the discussion that was happening online too, and people really loved it. And I think what was interesting about that genre was to find how the varying opinions on the character that Jean played, which most people were rooting for her, really looking for her to rise above this. But there were people that were, straight up angry at the character for not being stronger. So it was really interesting to see how it resonated with the audience on those two different levels.
You mentioned people are angry, but they still watch to the end, right?
Oh, yes.
Maybe that's the reason because they want to see
Yeah,
what the ending is about, right?
exactly. And I think people that were mad at her were really trying to see if she would find her redemption and her strength. And the people that were felt really bad for her also wanted to see that strength for a different reason. So they were really hooked to find out what she would do. And I think that's a testament to the script as well, that the story was written in a way that really grabbed the audience and had them following and wondering what was going to happen. So really great storytelling in that.
From your experience, what's the difference between like, traditional shooting and short drama shooting?
So much. Well, first off, it's just faster. You just move fast. And again, I come from more of the reality world. I've worked on scripted stuff before, but not at the same like Hollywood level that I work on as far as the reality goes. But I can tell you that when you're even in the independent world, you're not shooting up to 19 pages a day, which is what we do sometimes. We try very hard to stay away from that, but we're averaging 12 pages a day for these verticals. Sometimes we push it up to 19, 20 pages even, and it's just rapid. But I think part of it is the approach to it too. And when we, on the very first one, and I've used many of the same crew members for the other films that we've done, but we always, with Gene, the actor, and Jared, the actor, we were looking at the material and we're like, okay, this is not necessarily art, right? But there's something here. So you kind of have to dig a little bit more to find that genuine character, that anchor within the character that makes them relatable and human. So that is what we decided once we read the script. That's really what we got to do. And the subject matter is very melodramatic, but we took it as our approach was that let's lean into it. It is what it is. It's a story, and we're going to tell it the best that we can. And I think that's really the way we approach all of our films. There's this sense that soap operas are kind of looked down upon as not a serious art form, but I'm really appreciating it a lot more now too. And this has really taught me how to appreciate it. And I think everybody that we work with, everybody on our team has that same approach, that the more you put into it, the more you elevate it. And I think that's why several of our films have had a lot of success is because of that approach. I think this short drama or this mini vertical format, the format itself, and the way it's distributed and produced and consumed, I think has a lot of potential. I don't think it's going to remain in just the romance. We're already seeing people tackle other genres with this format too. Like we did a spy thriller for Salty TV, which was called Married to the Assassin, which isn't out yet, but that'll be out soon on their platform. And we did a horror film that didn't involve werewolves that was called Truth or Dare. So I think we're going to see a lot more of people experimenting with the genres, but I do believe there is something there possibly for other formats like unscripted and game shows as well. It's going to take some people experimenting, I think, with it a bit more. People are going to have to go out on the limb a little bit and take a bigger risk to figure out how other formats and other genres and types of content work for this. But I do believe that this has really opened the door to a whole new world for all types of content.
I would love to hear more about your like production setups.
So we usually shoot with two cameras. I use two DPs actually, and one of them shot Mr. Williams. He hates shooting with two cameras, and he moves faster with just one. Not an argument, but we try to find a good balance because we know we're moving fast enough, and we need the angles But a lot of times using just one camera allows you to move faster because just the way the geography of the room and the way the lights are set up. And most cameramen that I've worked with have a lot of experience in narrative. Using a second camera is sometimes a little poses more challenges than it solves. So for Mr. Williams, we used an FX6 and we used an FX3 as a secondary camera. And that's usually our setup when I work with that DP. His name is Ben Bradley Gilbert, fantastic DP. The other cameraman that I work with is Lorenzo Gonzalez. He shot with us on the Dreamy Short and Married to the Assassin. And he's got actually two red cameras, two Komodos that we use. It's totally overkill, but it's the equipment that we have. And it works great. He and his crew all know the equipment really well, so they can move fast with it. I will say for Truth or Dare, it all took place in one house. It was five friends in a house that were there for an experiential, kind of like a escape room. And we knew we were going to be really tight. So from the beginning, and we talked over it with Salty too, we're going to have to only use one camera on this because we're just not going to be able to fit it.
And is there a camera assistant?
Usually we have one camera assistant. Well, we always have one camera assistant. Sometimes we have two on the bigger days and the bigger productions, but it's really hard to move, especially with two cameras if you don't have a camera assistant.
What about the other crew?
It's funny. I'll start with Mr. Williams, Madame is Dying first because that was completely different. Like I said, that budget was so small. We shot that for $70,000. When I first started that, I was the producer, the director. I was casting, I was locations, I was wardrobe, I was craft services, I was second camera, and I think we were trying to do it with one cameraman, sound guy, and a couple days we had hair and makeup, PA. So as we got further into it, the budget was so small too. We were piecing things together. It was really like being right out of film school and shooting your first guerrilla film. I'd call up the crew and Gene and say, "Hey, I got a location for Thursday for 2 hours. Can you make it?" But once we started getting to the crux of the story, that's when we hired more people. But even then, we had a crew of 9 people on that. So it was myself, Ben, the DP, audio, assistant AD, a PA, and a gaffer and a grip and the 2 actors and a production designer too. That was really small. So that was 9. Most of our crews now that we're working with bigger budgets are around like 18, 2 cameras, one being the DP, sound, at least one camera assist, wardrobe, makeup, production designer. And again, depending on how big the production is, sometimes we have an assistant for one or more of those. We usually try to have at least 2 DPs, a DIT we use now as well to handle all the media, UPM, and sometimes the production coordinator and the UPM will act as the same role. Our budgets range 15 to 18, again, depending on the days and the size of the production that we need to make sure that we get everything. Our budgets, we've done everything from, like I said, Mr. Williams was 70,000, but we've had budgets all the way up to 185,000. For the US is still really, really, really tight. The script that we're working on right now is going to be 55 episodes. Our longest one, we did one for Flex called Dangerous Blind Wife. 81 episodes, I think, but it ended up being about, when we laid it all out in the timeline, it was almost 3 hours long, 147 pages. And yeah, that was a long one, but it didn't do very well. And we really do attribute a lot of that to it was just being too long, couldn't hold an audience long enough. We haven't announced this yet, but we are just entering into a co-production deal with Flex TV right now. We are going to be doing a rev share split with them. So we're going to bring in half the money. They're going to bring in half the money, and we'll do a rev split for the first time on our first 10 films we're going to do together. I was talking to Dreamy Short a little bit about that, and it seems like a lot of the companies are interested in that. And I've even been talking to Flex about bringing in on maybe one or two of our films a third party that could help us increase the budget as well. So we would have a larger budget, like closer to maybe 300 for something really spectacular.
You co-invest and you choose their scripts, right? Or you can provide your script.
So right now we are co-developing a script, and
Okay.
we're doing that because it's really difficult to find. What I'm also finding right now too is that because China is doing so many films right now, and
Mm-hmm.
then they had a lot of Chinese writers also trying to write for the American platforms. Now the scripts are really a big bottleneck. I mean, they've always been kind of the bottleneck. I know there's times where we're waiting on scripts for a couple of weeks. A few months ago, I had a lot of these platforms reaching out to me to see if we had scripts and if we had writers. And when we went to look for writers, there just are not that many American writers that have experience in the format. So we would send them some pitches and some ideas, and they're like, yeah, this isn't really, the ideas were there, but they weren't being executed well. So for this one, what we're doing with Flex is we're having our writer, who happens to be Gene Evans, who was the star of Mr. Williams, Madame is Dying. So she came up with a great concept that Flex really loved. And what we decided to do is Flex paired us with one of their writers as an editor. So they are coming up with the outline, or they came up with the outline, and then we're having Gene write the dialogue. And as we're developing that, we're going back and forth to the idea is really to have the American voice that is going to resonate with American audiences and global audiences, but use the best practices from the Chinese team because they've got more experience in telling these stories. So it's a really cool pairing. I think Mr. Williams is a great example too. There are a lot of cultural differences between the Chinese and American markets. Certain things resonate with American audiences, and certain things resonate with Chinese audiences better. And also in terms of the censorship in China too is something that I've been learning a lot about. But I think what that a lot of the Chinese platforms are learning now, over the last few months, is that a lot of these stories don't translate well. So they're looking for American voices and American stories and American writers. But no one really quite knows how to do that. Like, how do we essentially nurture and train the US writers to provide the stories in this format, having never done it before?
Normally, we find a Chinese short drama writer to write the script in Chinese, and then
Yep.
maybe AI translate into English, and then we have find someone from States maybe to localize it.
That's been what the most successful process, and that's how we've always worked with Dreamy Short and Flex TV as well. Um, but still, I think there's elements that aren't resonating as well with American audiences. Like I do know that talking to some of the other platforms, the whole CEO thing is and
Mhm.
billionaire thing is kind of getting played out. So the big challenge, I think, for the Chinese platforms and American platforms and writers and producers are how do we come up with how do we start telling American stories that are going to be successful in this format.
You mean the CEO thing is not trending anymore?
I was talking to a couple people at various platforms, and they said the romance are really the only things that are working for them. They've tried other genres, but the romance is the one that keeps hitting. But the types of romance, but they just said that we want more stories beyond the CEO and the billionaire because there's just so many stories out there that's almost saturated now.
So that didn't mean it's not trending. It's just want to explore more genres, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, understand.
exactly. And I think that, I mean, it's really surprising to me that many of the stories just keep getting told over and over and over again, and still are still successful. Even if you have a couple different types of CEO scripts, if they're done well and they're good stories and there's something unique about them, I still think there's a lot of play there to find success
We produce 100 new short dramas every day.
every day.
Yeah, 100 new every day. That's insane. But not many are hit dramas. Only like
Yeah, yeah.
top three, five are hit dramas. They're very profitable.
Okay, because that number keeps climbing too. I remember Mr. Williams did really well. I started looking a lot more into the industry, and that's when I decided that creating our own app was the right way to go. And the first figure that I heard was 300 films in China a month is what was being produced. And then the next one I heard, actually like 3 or 4 months ago, I heard it was 500 a month. And now You're saying it's a 100 a day.
Yeah.